Hey, what's going on, everybody? So today I'm going to show you how to set up a reverse proxy in a virtual machine using NGINX or NGINX or NGINX, whatever you want to call it. So the purpose of this is to kind of get rid of that annoying thing with your local servers where you have your own DNS and you want to type in the name, the host name, the DNS name of your server, but you don't want to attach that port number onto the end of it if it's using something other than port 80 or 443. Some examples of this that are pretty common that I see are the Ubiquity line of stuff like the Unifi Controller. It uses port 8080 or 8443. You can't just browse to the host name of that server without attaching a port number to it. Plexpy is another one. Plex Management Stat Server, it uses port 8181. So anytime you want to browse to that, you either got to type in the IP and the port number or your domain name and the port number as well. You can't just browse to it. Now, a lot of people think that you can take care of this in DNS just by making a DNS entry with a port number. That is not the case. DNS does not work like that. All it does is it resolves a DNS name to an IP address. It has nothing to do with the ports. So you can't just put a port number in a DNS entry and have it work like this. What you need is a reverse proxy or something like it. So just so we can kind of get a picture of what we're going to be doing, let me just draw this out. So say you've got your home router. All right, so say you've got your home router and all of your servers hanging off of it, and we'll just pretend that this is either a router or a switch, whatever you've got as your core home network. And then you've got your servers hanging off of that, so we'll say Plexpy here, Unifi here, UNMS if you're managing the edge router kind of devices, and we'll just throw in a Pihole. So each one of these uses different ports to manage. UNMS actually uses 443 by default, so that one there's really no need to have a reverse proxy for, but Unifi will use 8443 for HTTPS, and Plexpy only uses HTTP and it's on 8181. And Pihole uses /admin at the end. So just a regular DNS entry is not going to work for any of these servers except the UNMS one. So what we're going to have to do is say we have a DNS server over here, assuming it is not the Pihole server, and then you got your desktop over here that you're going to be accessing everything on. So what's going to happen is usually your desktop would just go ask the DNS server to resolve the host name to an IP, and then your computer would communicate directly with whatever server you were going to, say Plexpy in that case. What we can do when we introduce in a reverse proxy using NGINX, what'll happen is we'll have a DNS entry on our DNS server pointing towards our NGINX server for that service. So our computer is going to go to DNS, it's going to get the IP, and then it's going to talk to our NGINX server. And now NGINX is going to act as kind of a middleman, and it's going to forward on the requests to the whatever server you're wanting to access. So say you're accessing Plexpy, it's going to forward those requests on, and then Plexpy is going to send it back to NGINX, and it's going to send it back to the desktop. So it acts as kind of a middleman, and it's going to associate port numbers with this traffic. So your computer, you don't have to type in the actual port numbers. It just goes to it. If you try to access a website for Plexpy on port 80, then it's going to go to NGINX. NGINX is going to have a configuration line that says, all right, for port 80, send that traffic to the Plexpy server on port 8181. And then that traffic is just going to go back and forth, and it's going to work just like you're connecting to your Plexpy server on port 80, except for you're actually talking to the NGINX server. Now, this is just one thing that NGINX can do. Reverse proxies are actually used in production for things like load balancing or just security in general. Since you're not actually talking to the server that you're accessing, there's a kind of a layer of security there. So people accessing your public website, they're only interfacing with your reverse proxy. They're not actually interfacing with the website. And also, if you have multiple web servers that you can load balance across, NGINX can do that for you as well. However, I am not an expert in NGINX. I don't know how to do any of that. I've never done any of that, and even this reverse proxy stuff I don't really understand. I just know how to get it set up and going for a home network. So I'm sorry, but if you ask questions down in the comment about very specifics of NGINX or reverse proxy in general, I'm probably not going to be able to answer it, but I can give you these configurations in this video that'll at least get you off the ground and working. And if you're using any of these specific services like Unifi, UNMS, Plexpy, or Pihole, then I'm literally going to show you exactly what to type in to get those to work. So let's go ahead and dive into this. So let's spin up our virtual machine or whatever server you're going to be using. I am using Hyper-V for this virtual machine. I know you usually see me running Unraid, but I spun up my own Hyper-V or Windows Server installation just to mess around with. So I got a few of my VMs over here. And if this is your first time booting it up, you're going to want to know what the IP of it is. So let's go ahead and enter the console here. Also, I'm running Ubuntu 16.04.3 server edition if you would like to follow along, but you can install this on like really any Linux instance. And we're just going to do a quick ifconfig, and I couldn't see it, so I typed it wrong. And we can see the IP address we're going to be dealing with is 10.88.88.171. Sorry, can't highlight that, but just kind of make a note of that. That is the IP address that you're going to want to point your DNS entries to for pretty much everything we're going to configure. Now I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this console, and I'm going to bring up SolarPutty and SSH to this using my client instead because I prefer it. Alright, now that we are logged into our virtual machine, we're going to need to install NGINX. And that is very simple. Let's just do a sudo apt install NGINX and say yes to the extra space that it wants to make. And then if we want to verify this installation, we can do a sudo systemctl status NGINX. And what we're looking for is it saying that it is active and running and that little green dot. So we're good on our install here. Now what this did was it created a few folders under etc. So if we change directory to etc, oops, I did the period there, so etc. If we do a list, we should be able to see an NGINX server, or not server, but a directory. So right there, so let's change directory down into the NGINX folder, do another list, and you can see we've got a few directories and some files. Now the two directories that we're going to be concerned with is sites available and sites enabled. Now these two folders kind of go hand in hand. Sites enabled has, I believe they're called link files to the sites available configuration files. So all your configuration is going to be done in sites of sites available, but you can edit the configuration from sites enabled. Anything you do in sites enabled is going to change your configuration in sites available. But if you make new configuration files under sites available, they won't be populated into sites enabled. You have to manually create a link between those files for it to work. But we're not really going to worry about any of that, because if we change directory into either one of these, so we'll go into sites enabled and do a list, you can see we have a default file. Now it shows up teal because that's a link, and I might be using the wrong word for that, but that's how I think of it. It's a linked file. So basically this is a mirror of what's in sites available, and all it does is point everything to the actual configuration file that's under sites available. So if we change directory up one and go into sites available, do a list, here we have just a regular default text file. And if we do a nano on that, you can see that it's got a bunch of stuff already in here. It kind of gives some guidance on the configuration, how to set some things up, what certain parameters mean. If you want to read it, read it. We're not going to go into it. We're actually just going to delete this file. So let's do a sudo remove default. You can see there's nothing in this directory anymore. And let's go ahead and do another sudo nano default, since we already have a link to it and we have our brand new configuration file. Now this is what we're going to be working in. This is what we're going to set everything up through. Now I'm going to have most of this configuration down in the description, so you can kind of just copy, paste, modify, and whatnot. But right here I'm actually going to be hand jamming it in, so it may or may not work when I'm done, but that will actually just show you some of the error handling mechanisms that NGINX has. It'll actually tell you where you screwed up in your configuration, and you can just go in there and change it. Maybe you fat fingered something if you're actually doing it by hand. But if you don't care about just going along with this and doing it by hand, there are the examples down in the description. But let's set up our configuration for Plexpy first. So we're going to start every line out with just server, and I'm not sure what you call these. I call it a squiggly bracket. I'm not a programmer, not a coder, so I apologize if I call all of these completely the wrong name, but hopefully I'm not too far off. Alright, so if we drop down a line and tab over, we can do listen 80 and semicolon. So what this is doing is it's telling the server to listen on port 80 for incoming traffic. And if we drop down another line and we do server underscore name, and we'll do plexpy.lan. So this is kind of just like the DNS name that you're going to use to browse to this site. Let's drop down another couple lines, tab over. We're going to do location and root or /, another squiggly bracket. Drop down another line, and we're going to do proxy underscore pass. Now this is the configuration command that tells the server to pass along or proxy the data onto a different location. So we're going to do quotations and HTTP 10.88.88.243 and then colon 8181 and then another quotation and semicolon. And then we just got to drop down another line just to make it pretty and do 2 of these squiggly line brackets. So what we've told this thing to do right now is just listen on port 80 for a DNS name of plexpy.lan and to forward that information on and proxy it to this IP address using HTTP on port 8181. Now this is probably the most simple configuration in here. They do get a little more complicated with HTTPS and SSL and whatnot, but at its bare bones, that is a very simple configuration. So let's do another one. Server, squiggly bracket, drop down a line. We're going to listen again on port 80, do a semicolon there, drop over. This server name is going to be UNMS.LAN. We're going to proxy this traffic even though we don't really need to. Another semicolon, drop down a couple lines. Location is going to be root, squiggly bracket, drop down again. Except this time we're not going to proxy the data. We're going to do a return. So return 301 and then the address that we're going to return, which is actually HTTPS. And we're going to do some variables here. So $host, $request underscore URI. And what this is going to do is it's just going to forward on any traffic coming in on port 80 to the exact same requested host address, which is unms.lan, using HTTPS instead. So this is kind of like your forwarding configuration here. So if you've got a server such as UNMS that functions using HTTPS on port 443, but you want it to automatically forward if you just accidentally type in the name and it goes to the server on port 80, this configuration is going to automatically proxy that traffic onto a secure connection using HTTPS. And right below that, we're actually going to do the configuration to proxy that HTTPS traffic. So if we do listen on port 443, then also specify SSL HTTP2, semicolon, drop down a line. Here is where we're going to put in a few SSL commands for certificates. And these are the ones I was talking about earlier where I don't actually know exactly what they do. Can't really explain them, but I do know that they point towards certificate files that we're going to generate and put on this server later. And these kind of just make it where the website works. That's the best way I can explain it. If I just set up a listen on port 443 configuration, just vanilla, it usually doesn't work. The web UI will have a lot of issues, certain things won't get forwarded right, and it just caused a mess. So these commands I actually just Googled, I got them from somewhere and put them in and they worked. So sorry I don't really have too much more explanation, but you can just copy and paste these. Again, I'm going to hand jam them. First one is SSL underscore certificate, and then this is going to be the path to where you actually have your domain cert file. So that one you do kind of want to pay attention to. And then this next one is the location of your key file. And we should have semicolons at the end of all of these. Don't forget that, or else it'll spit back an error later. And then the other 2 commands are just specifying what protocols and ciphers you're going to be using with SSL. Now let's get on to the server name. So server underscore name is unms.lan, semicolon. Drop down another couple lines, do the location, root, squiggly, and then we're going to actually proxy pass this one to HTTPS and the IP address of the UNMS server, which is 88.241 on port 443. And then drop down and close out these brackets. So that is the configuration for UNMS, and all we did was we put a return command here, listening on port 80, so anything coming in for unms.lan on port 80 is automatically going to get forwarded to HTTPS unms.lan, which, because of this configuration, is going to get forwarded on and proxied to this IP address on port 443. Now let's do Unifi. So it's going to be much the same. Actually, I'm just going to copy and paste all of this for Unifi. Whoop. Alright, so if we just go up here and change the server name of unms.lan to unifi.lan, that's basically all we need to do for that part. Then drop down here and we'll go ahead and change the server name to unifi.lan, but we're going to add some additional configuration under that. So let's go ahead and just delete those. So the rest of this can stay the same. Oh, well, except the IP address. So this is going to go to 242 on port 8443, not just 443. That's the whole reason we're doing this. And we're going to set a few more options. Again, I just Googled these. Don't know what these do, but it does something with the HTTP headers, because Unifi is something that I had a big issue with actually using once it was proxied. And after I put all of these in, which I found on Google, it worked. Alright, and again, I don't know how to explain really any of that, but this whole section is the additional configuration needed for Unifi to actually function properly. Now, the last one that we're going to do is Pihole. So, server, tab over, we're going to listen on port 80, and the server name, underscore name, not dash name, is going to be pihole.lan. Location, again, root, squiggly bracket, and we're going to proxy pass that to http 10.88.88.244/admin, and close out those squiggly brackets, and that's all we have to do for that. So http so port 80 is pretty easy. That's really all you need to do. 443, a little more difficult, as you saw with Unifi and UNMS above. But if you're wanting to do this for other services besides just these, I would honestly just take this vanilla 80 configuration, use that for anything that's just using HTTP, and start with the UNMS config, the kind of smaller one for anything HTTPS. And if you're experiencing issues, try the one I used for Unifi. See if that works. That's pretty much all the configuration that we need to do here. So let's exit out, save that file as default, and restart our NGINX service. So sudo system control restart. I think I misspelled, systemctl. There we go, password. And alright, it failed because, let's see, C system control and journal. Alright, there's another command we can do here that works a little better. Alright, that is sudo NGINX-s reload. Okay, here we go. So this one says that the file mydomaincert failed. Okay, yeah, so this is a certificate error. This is because we don't have any certificates yet. So what we have to do is generate them and put them in the domains that we specified in our configuration file. So to do that, and again, this is in the description below, but if you want to follow along, that's sudo open SSL req-x509-nodes-days 365 if we want it to be good for a year. Oh, put a space there. Dash new key, RSA, and we're going to do 2048 as the length, and then dash key out, and this is the directory location of the key file. So we're going to go into etc NGINX. I forget where we said it was going to go. I think it was in SSL folder, and it was going to be called, I believe, my private key.key, I do believe. We're going to do space, dash out, and then the location of our actual certificate file. So etc NGINX, SSL, and then mydomaincert, I believe, .crt. Let's do enter, and it should ask us some questions, but it didn't. Alright, it says no such file or directory, so we're going to have to change directory into etc NGINX and do a make directory SSL. Permission denied, sudo make directory SSL. There we go. Now if we run that command again to generate the key, it should ask us some questions. Yep, here we go. So country name, I'm going to do US, state or province, Illinois, that's where I'm from. Locality name, we're just going to do generic stuff from here on out. Organization name, test, organizational unit, just leave it blank. Common name, blank. Email address, whatever at whatever. And our keys are generated. So if we actually change directory down into the SSL, do a list, there is our two files that we made. So myprivatekey.key and mydomaincert.crt. Now this is just generating your own SSL keys. You can go to, what is it, like Let's Encrypt or any other certificate vendor and actually buy one that's legit and trusted. And that's probably the preferred way to do this if you're wanting public facing services. But for this example, just generating our own is fine enough. Now let's try that command again to restart NGINX. So sudo NGINX-s reload, and here we go. Run NGINX failed, no such file or directory. That is That's weird. That's one I've never seen before. All right, apparently we need to paste this stuff in and then try it. All right, that one worked, and apparently there were no errors in our configuration file. But let's do a sudo nginx, or not nginx, systemctl status nginx, just to make sure it's still running. It says it's active and running, so we reloaded it successfully, and since it didn't spit back any errors, there were no issues with our configuration file. Now, this whole section that I just copy and pasted in, I had to Google it real fast because that error was something weird. I guess if you get that error, I'll put this in the description below too, so if it says that the nginx process ID doesn't exist, then just do that and it works apparently. So that was something I had to come up with on the fly. I've never seen that before. Now at this point, we need to update our DNS records to point to this NGINX server for these services. So I'm going to open another tab here, and I'm SSHing into my Pihole. So for me, I use Pihole as my DNS server for my local network, and I actually did a video on that earlier about how to set up a Pihole as a local DNS server. So if you want to know how to do that, check that out, but I'm just going to be editing my DNS configuration on my Pihole. So we're going to change the directory and open up our LAN.list and plug in the IP for these servers. Now I already have all of this configuration in here, so here at the bottom is kind of my proxy thing. So I have a comment that says the actual IP that the service is hosted on. So let's see, for Plexpy, one we did, so my Plexpy is hosted 10.88.88.243 on port 8181, but we're going to point the IP that we're forwarding to the IP of our NGINX server now, which was 171. So let's change that for Plexpy, Unifi, UNMS, and what was the other one we did? No, Pihole. Forgot about Pihole, which is actually what I'm on right now. So let's exit that and save it. Now, before I actually restart the DNS service, let's open this up. I forgot to verify that we can't actually get to these. So let's go to https unms.lan and http plexpy.lan and also https unifi.lan. Now all of these should time out. Plexpy already said that it can't be reached, and the other two are just going to spin there for a while. So those can't be found because the DNS entry form was pointed to my old proxy server. But let's restart the DNS service. So not sudo, I think it's just Pihole restart DNS, and there we go. So minimize that, and let's try these again. So unms.lan, plexpy.lan, and unifi.lan. Might have to give this a couple minutes to kind of do whatever magic it's got to do in the background, but eventually this should work. Alright, so there we go. unms.lan says it's not secure, but that's because we're using self-signed certificates. And there we go. There's our login for UNMS. So let's go over to Plexpy now. Refresh this. HTTP plexpy.lan. Oop. Man, I'm just misspelling everything. Plexpy.lan. Oh, come on. There we go. Now Plexpy is up, or Tautulli, whatever the hell it's called now. So unifi.lan is the only one that's holding out on us. There we go. Just a simple refresh. And boom, we can now get into our Unifi controller. Now this is the one I had the most issues with a standard 443 configuration in NGINX. I did have to do those extra configurations that you saw earlier just so that it would work right when I actually logged in. So if you have issues with Unifi and you didn't put those extra commands in, I highly recommend doing that. Now the last one was the Pihole, so http pihole.lan. It looks like that one's not working for whatever reason. Still not working. I wonder why that is. Alright, it says it redirected too many times. So let's go back to our configuration file and see if we can't figure out why that is. Maybe we fat fingered something. So change directory etc nginx sites available and sudo nano default. Let's go down to our Pihole configuration. Let's see, we got server name of pihole.lan, and we're proxy passing that to http /admin. Let's add another slash to the end of this. That could be our issue. So exit, save the changes, overwrite default, and then do a sudo nginx-s reload. And go back to our web browser and try to get there again. Yep, there we go. It was that extra slash at the end that we needed. So that is how you set up a reverse proxy to get around having to type in port numbers. It's a little bit complicated, but simple at the same time. Now, I actually have my network set up to resolve 2 host names per device. So all of these servers you're seeing right here, the UNMS, Pihole, Plexpy.lan, I actually have DNS entries for the actual servers they're hosted on. So if I actually went to http december-plexpy.lan, this is actually going to hit the real IP of the server. And this is what you would normally see if you just set up regular DNS entries. So for ones like this, I do have to attach the port number onto the end of them. So 8181. And I can still access it like that. But instead of having to do that port number, this reverse proxy lets us just do plexpy.lan and get there the same way. Now, one thing that I didn't really explain, and that is kind of a little bit of a, I don't want to say a bug, there is configuration I can do to get around it, I just haven't done it yet. And that is if you accidentally try to go to a secure version of one of the sites that isn't secure. So let's say we want to do https pihole.lan. It's going to go to the very first site you have configured for SSL in your configuration file. So pihole.lan is actually going to take us to UNMS because that's the first one we configured to use SSL. And we don't have any redirect configuration for secure versions of our non-secure configurations. So the same thing would happen if I tried to do HTTPS on Plexpy. Because we didn't have a port 443 configuration for Plexpy, it's just going to take us to UNMS. And it's going to give the privacy error every time because we're using a different DNS name to get to it. Alright, so thank you for watching this video. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you can get this running if this is something that you're interested in. Like I said, I don't really know a whole lot about how this works. This is in a whole different realm that I'm just not used to, so I can't really do in-depth explanation of it. But this is what I use on my home network to get all this running, and so I don't have to type in port numbers. Hopefully one day I'll figure out or just put in the redirects for HTTP, but I've kind of tried it a little bit and not really got the desired results. So personally, I just live with anything HTTPS being forwarded to my UNMS server. I don't care. Now, if that was a public-facing server, for one, I don't want it using HTTP anyway, and two, I would definitely not want that forwarding to some other random server that I have. So that's definitely something I would want to fix if I was hosting it publicly, but on an internal network, that's just something that I can kind of live with until I dig into it later. But like I said, thanks for watching, and happy networking.